So I'm Mathieu Bourget. I'm the data science director of D2R, first of all. I'm also the director of the health data science platforms, which is a platform to support the data science at McGill and especially at D2R for D2R project. So I'm happy to give a first iteration of this workshop on how to write a data management plan using the new D2R template that we have built with Alisa. So I am my co-host is Alisa Rod from the research data management, which is a research data management specialist working at the DRS and at the McGill Library. To start, just a quick overview of what we'll talk about today and how the workshop will be held. First, I will give a small introduction about what is the research data management vision at D2R. And then I will let Alisa, which is or a DMP expert at McGill, to go more into detail about what is a DMP and how to write it. So she will give you more I would say formal information, and she will do a demo, and then I will take back the microphone to do some concluding remark about data management and what is expected. So let's start with the small introduction. So, to start, I want to iterate how important research data management is. I'm seeing that similar to what's happened like 20 years ago when we start to build ethic board and start to have to fill these ethic board documents. So research data management is the same is a similar context, but not for human participant, but more for data, how to manage your data. And it's a pillar of research excellence and integrity. And at D2R, we rely on the FAIR principle, which means that we want the data which is financed and supported by D2R initiative to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Why we have chosen this approach? Because we think by making our data findable, accessible, helps you to create more collaboration, and having a good data strategy is also a better way to improve your research outcome and your research productivity. So in this regard, the D2R initiative has released the research data management guideline and best practices that have been approved by the researching committee of D2R in March of this year. And my introduction will a bit guide you about what's included in this guidelines, and then we'll switch to the data management plan aspect right after. Before we go more in detail, if you have questions, we have a Q&A windows, so feel free to put your question, and we'll try to address it as best as we can with Alisa, either during the presentation or at the end of the presentation. So just to give you a summary of the research data management guideline and requirement that D2R ask for his researcher. So we ask a researcher and research project that D2R finance to submit data management plan. So either at your application or within the 3 months post award. And the main requirement is we require that you contact Alisa or myself to get the conversation about data management as soon as possible when you get your award. What we also require from researcher is to deposit their data, metadata and code that support any conclusion at the moment of publication or at the moment of the preprint is submitted into a digital repository. Also, as D2R is supported by the 3 agency program, so the research that is conducted under the D2R program need to follow the 3 agency ethic if there's some human involved. It's also the researcher need to follow the responsible conduct of research from the 3 agency. And for researchers that are located in Quebec, researchers need to follow the Quebec's privacy legislation. For example, if people are collecting personal information from participants of a study, for example, they need to follow the Quebec Loi 25. The other requirement that we ask for a D2R researcher is if there's any intellectual property that is generated from the project, it needs to be to inform the McGill Policy and Invention and Software Office and the McGill policy and follows McGill policy on copyright. If you involve human data, then you need to have an RRB approval. And if you use animal data, then you need to be compliant with the Animal Compliance Office of McGill. Then if you use data from indigenous community, it's important that when you build your data management plan and your data management strategy to build this plan in partnership with the community and following their standards. So most of the community use either OCAP or CARE standard, but it could be other standards. So you need to really have this discussion with your partner in the community, and you need to remember that the community owns the data. Finally, the last requirement we ask for researcher inside D2R is to implement strong security measure on your data. So the vision could be divided in three roles. So the D2R as an initiative has the obligation to maintain the data management guideline to promote the fair, ethical, and secure data management, to provide tools to support data management, such as the D2R catalog, and to ensure that data is made accessible as early as possible. As a research project, your role is to provide data management plan, to ensure your data is private and secure, to share your data at the latest at the publication time, and to ensure people that work on your project is aware of this guideline and will follow the requirement of this guideline. And as the EDS data science platform, our role as supporting this initiative is to provide template for data management creation, what we will see today, to provide consultation, training to help you with your data management plan, to develop the data catalog for D2R, and also to collect any feedback or suggestion for improvement in the data management strategy of D2R. Just to know that in this document, we also give some advice and best practices on data collection and storage, open science, data management, and data sharing. I will not go into details for this point today because our focus is on data management plan. And I think I will now let Alisa take the lead to give you more detail on how to write the data management plan.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen.
Yes.
Can you see it or?
Not yet.
It seems a bit frozen. Oh my goodness. 1 second. The Zoom application is freezing for me.
Okay. Do you want me to reshare my slide?
Hold on 1 second. It should work now.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. All right, so how to write the data management plan using the DMP Assistant, which is a tool that we have available for researchers in general for any kind of data management planning. But in general, what is a data management plan? What does it look like? They are typically 2 to 3 pages. So that's not like a requirement, but it's just a sort of general rule of thumb. In this case, in some cases, there are funding agencies that would actually have a limit on what the requirement is. Essentially, it's a document that outlines the tools, methods, and procedures that you're going to use to manage your data during the project, but also thinking about future data sharing or preservation of the data. So it's a plan that's in place now during the project, but that it sets you up to follow the FAIR principles once you're finished with the project and are making the data accessible or available to other researchers or for other projects. So essentially what it covers is the stages of the research data life cycle. So we like to think about research data as having a life cycle rather than a sort of linear start point and end point, but rather that it can be continually reused, or that it needs to be continually cared for. So one or the other or both. But essentially, you're planning from the beginning before you start the project, typically for the collection or creation of the data. You're thinking about where you're going to store the data. So it's very detail oriented. It's very much in terms of, it's not high level. It's very much in terms of what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis with the data, how you're making it secure if that's something that's required. How are you computing on it? How are you analyzing it? Who has access to the data? How are they granted access? How are you documenting your data and your methods so that it's reproducible or at least transparent to the project? And then what's going to happen with the data at the end of the project? Will it be shared? Will it be available for reuse? Will it be preserved for some or retained for some period of time? Will it be published somewhere? So thinking all of this through from the beginning. And in terms of how to write one, I'm going to demonstrate a tool called the DMP Assistant, which is hosted by the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So they own this tool and they fund it and fund developers for the tool. It's Canada specific, so it has a bunch of templates that are built in. They're coming up with discipline specific templates every year. So that's an option for folks who are writing a DMP for other kinds of contexts. We have a D2R template that we're going to show. That's a McGill specific template. And then there's also a bunch of primers and guides that are linked from the DMP Assistant tool itself. So I'll show you that as well if you're looking for extra guidance. McMaster University also has a database of examples of DMPs. So these are ones that have been made publicly available in different kinds of contexts for different disciplines. It can be useful to see if you want to see what one looks like. They're not saying these are good or bad or anything to that effect. It's just the ones that happen to be public. So they've aggregated all the ones that are publicly available in case you'd like to see some examples. And then I've also linked to a checklist of what should be included into the DMP. Before I go into the tool, I'm just going to show you a series of screenshots of the tool itself to get you familiar with it, and then I will actually go in and show you how to use it precisely. So the DMP Assistant, it's a web-based interface and tool, so you interact with it in the browser. You can create an account. Initially, you can actually use single sign-on, so if you can authenticate as a McGill user with single sign-on, you can create an account with your ORCID ID as well to do single sign-on, or you can just manually create an account. You would want to affiliate yourself to McGill when you create your account. So in organization, if you're doing this manually, you would want to make sure to put McGill, and that will give you access to the McGill templates that are available, including the D2R template. So you can work in the DMP Assistant in both English and French. So if you want to work and write your DMP in French, that's also fine. And then once you get into the DMP Assistant tool, if you've written DMPs before, you have a draft of a DMP, you'll see it listed in a dashboard. So I have a bunch of them because I create a bunch for workshops that are examples, and also I have some for other projects that I'm working on as well. And you can see that you can create a bunch of actions. So you could copy an existing template. So let's say you want to create a new version of a template. You would create a copy of that, for example, or if you want to use the same DMP and reuse some of that material for a new project or for a new context, for a new funder, you can just copy it and sort of work from there as well, if you want to. You can download them, you can share them, and you can edit it directly from the dashboard. But if not, you can create a new template, a new DMP from the dashboard itself by clicking on Create Plan. Once you get into this Create Plan page of the DMP Assistant, it'll ask you to put a title for your project. So you write the title of the project that you're working on. It will ask you for the research organization that you're affiliated with. Again, you'll have to type in McGill University manually there. And then once you've typed that in, you'll see this third drop-down menu of which template would you like to use. And then you can click into the dropdown, and at the very bottom of that list will be McGill and D2R. So you would go ahead and click the McGill and D2R template to get started. Once you get into the template, you'll see a number of tabs that have some information. So one of them is the tab for actually writing the plan. The first tab has information about the project itself, so an abstract. You can put dates for the project, things of that nature. On the Write Plan tab, you actually have a bunch of sections that are the D2R template for the DMP. So the first section is about contractual, legal, and ethical compliance. So it's context about the project. What are some constraints around the project related to ethical, legal, or commercial concerns? So we recommend sort of putting that in advance, so that kind of impacts how, like, where the data are stored and how the data are analyzed and who has access to the data, because that's the context around the security and the level of sensitivity of the data typically. So then there's sections about data collection, sections about metadata, storage and backup, sharing and reuse, and then some governance questions about responsibility and resources. So you have all of this outlined in one document, which can be really handy when you're onboarding trainees or new researchers or staff members or collaborators. They have one document to look to sort of see where all the data are located, how it's set up, how they should name their files, what's the directory structure of the information, things of that nature. Once you go into these sections, you can expand them and you'll see a place to just essentially type out the responses to a series of prompts. The prompts are sort of together what combine with your responses make a data management plan. So it's getting you to sort of write up the data management plan through a series of questions about what should be included. So you have a space to write and save your response. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to have guidance that Mathieu and others from D2R have provided as part of the template. So it's McGill specific advice related to the D2R initiative. So it will be very, very specific to the kinds of data that's collected for these kinds of projects. You also have the ability to write comments. So if you have multiple people working on it, or when you're finished with the DMP in the system, you would share it with Mathieu, and he might have some comments of, you know, oh, this is good, or maybe you can clarify this, or something to that effect. You can also share it with me. I'm happy to comment on it as well. So you have a couple options for sort of a higher level review, or you can share it with your own collaborators so that they can sort of add information if they think that there's something missing or that's something that needs to be clarified. When you're ready, when you're finished with a draft of your DMP that you feel like this can guide us for at least for the initial startup of the project, it doesn't have to be set in stone. It's not like an ethics review or a grant application where it can't be updated and you're sort of like held to what you said initially. It can be updated as you work on the project, as things change, or as, you know, requirements or tools around managing your data or analyzing your data change. But you would want to have a version of that's the initial one you're working off of, that's sort of an authoritative version. And for that to happen, you would want to share this with Mathieu. So you see I've put his email as under the invite collaborators to show the example that we were sharing it with Mathieu. He will have access in his dashboard in DMP Assistant to all of the DMPs created for D2R. So he'll have a handy way to see all of them all at once and to export them all together. If you then end up creating a second version of it, or if you want to do some editing or updating of it, I would recommend creating a copy of it, calling it version 2, and then resharing it with Mathieu so that you have this record of the changes and the most current or most recent version that's being used. You can also give people different levels of permissions. You can make them co-owners, editors, or you can give folks read-only access. So that's up to you. And now I'm going to switch to share my screen with the DMP Assistant in the browser. And I'm going to copy the link into the chat in case people want to take a look at it while I'm doing this. I'm going to do it to everyone. So the link should be in the chat, and you should see the browser with the DMP Assistant tool. Mathieu, can you nod to show me? Do you see my browser? Yes? Okay, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. La, la, la. going to think about it. This is why I include the screenshots, because sometimes, for some reason, every time I do a demo of it, that's when they decide to do some maintenance or something. So I have my dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and create plan. So again, you see that you don't see that third drop-down menu of the McGill specific templates or the Digital Research Alliance of Canada templates until you put your organization. So we're going to do X on Y by Z version 1. So this is going to be my first version of the data management plan I'm writing. And I'm going to type in McGill. And once I start typing it, it will come up and be an option that I can select. Then I will be able to select templates. So you'll see there's a bunch of templates for the Alliance. They have a bunch of disciplinary templates like neuroimaging, open science workflows, qualitative health sciences research. So they have some useful ones that could be used in other contexts if you're going for funding for a different project or for a different funding agency. They have this simplified template, which they're recommending be used for tri-agency applications, for example. And then we have two at McGill. We have a medicine and quantitative health sciences template that was co-developed with the RIMUHC. And then we have a D2R template that's sort of an adaptation of this medicine template as well, but more specific to the kinds of projects and data that will be collected under D2R. So you would go ahead and select that and then click on Create Plan. And again, we get into this area where I can put an abstract for the project. You can do that. You don't have to do that necessarily. You can go into the contributors tab and add a contributor. So someone would have to have an account already in DMP Assistant, and then you can add them as someone who can contribute to the plan itself. In plan overview, you see the template, the questions that are in the template. So if you want a preview of what the questions are that are in the template itself, you can just skim them on this overview tab here before you go into the writing part of the template. But critically, to write a DMP, you actually have to type something out. So you would go into this Write Plan tab, and that's where you can expand the sections that would together create a document that would be the data management plan for your project. So again, you have this first section where it talks about compliance issues or any constraints related to ethical or legal obligations for your data. You go ahead and type into the space provided, you would save it. You have a bunch of guidance on the right-hand side about what kinds of commercial restrictions or industry restrictions might be applicable. So there's some examples there. So for the ethics, there's the guidance refers to like your research ethics board protocol might have some restrictions on what you can do with the data. If you're working with Indigenous communities or Indigenous data, there might be some frameworks that would apply that you would want to discuss in this section here. And then there might be some legal restrictions. So depending on what population of individuals you might be working with, if you're collecting data from individuals or from humans, then there might be different levels of legislation at province, national, or international levels, depending on who is in your population. So the critical section is the data collection section. And here we have a lot more guidance on like specifically what we mean by what types of data will you collect, what will you generate, what instruments or scales are going to be used to collect the data if that's applicable, what software programs will you use. So very detail-oriented specifics about working with the data. If something doesn't apply to your case, that's totally fine. You don't have to fill in every single question. If one doesn't apply, just skip it because when you export the DMP, it will not be included in the document. It just says not applicable as the answer, for example. I think it's fine to just skip it and have a cohesive document that's more of a narrative that walks you through what's actually going on in the project with the data. So we have here included a table for the data collection type where you can actually fill it out directly in the response box here. You can add rows or remove them as you need to. So you could fill out the data type, the collection dates. If they're planned, that's fine. If you just have an estimate, that's fine. What file formats are you collecting it in? And critically, the thought behind this question is, are they collected in open or what we call archival formats? So formats where they can be opened in a variety of software and it doesn't require proprietary software. So where that's possible, that's usually recommended to meet the FAIR criteria at the end of your project. It might not be possible depending on some instruments that collect data. That's also fine, but you might want to discuss that as a justification for not having an open format in that case. If it's collected using an instrument or scale, the size estimate could be important in terms of, having implications for where the data will be stored, how it could be shared at the end of the project, and things of that nature. And the software program has implications for the reuse of that data at the end of the project, right? Does someone need to have a license to a specific software program or access to a specific set of infrastructure to be able to work with that? So yeah, if you want to just add rows, like let's say you're collecting lots of different types of data, you can just navigate to the menu that pops up when you click on this table. You could add a row. You can also remove rows. You can add columns. Let's say you wanted to combine this question with, there's another question in the template about naming conventions for files. You could add columns to this table and just list the conventions for naming those different types of files within the same table and discuss it in the same question. So there is flexibility. It's more about capturing that information. So it's not necessary to be redundant and sort of repeat yourself. If you've already answered a question, you could skip it and just collapse it into another question. That's fine. So you don't have to take the template extremely literally, but it's meant as a sort of guidance or framework for collecting all of the information that would be relevant to data management. And so you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a lot more guidance on things like specific types of data that could be collected, like omics data or molecular and immunological data, computational data, and how to fill out the table or how to explain that in this context, given the kinds of data. And there's a very, very beautiful example of a filled out table with lots of different kinds of potential data that could be collected under these projects. That gives you an idea of what kind of information is relevant to the data management plan. So it's sort of laid out here in an example right underneath the response option. There's other questions about data if you're using secondary data. So how will you organize that? Are there data sharing arrangements related to any secondary data that you're using? So not data that you're collecting yourself, but data that you're taking from another source that already exists, for example. We have a question about conventions and procedures to structure, name, and version control the files. And then a lot of guidance here, including a link to a file naming convention worksheet. So that could walk you through how to set up file naming conventions for the digital information that you're collecting, if that's relevant. There's also examples here of what that would look like in the guidance. For metadata and documentation, there's a couple questions about what documentation someone would need to be able to not just verify your findings or replicate it, but for the D2R team members to understand what you're doing and what's going on with the data, and also just for transparency purposes. There's an example here that explains like what kind of information you would put for certain kinds of experiments or for certain kinds of data specifically, so that could be useful as well. And then if there are any metadata standards that you would use to describe your data, and that's not just thinking about during the project, but if you want to make your data fair at the end of the project, the way it's made fair is by having some metadata associated with your data set that then can be indexed in search engines. So the way people find data sets, so the F from the FAIR principles is findable. The way they find data is that it is described well and has machine readable metadata. So metadata that can be ingested by computational systems that index information and then retrieve it based on queries, right? So if someone's typing something into Google, like I want data about, DNA sequencing and whatever it is that you're working on, they should be able to find data related to that query. And the only way they can do that is if the data set has the appropriate metadata that allowed it to be indexed in relation to that kind of query. So we have some guidance on the right-hand side that explains this as well and why that's important. But it's more thinking about the end of the project rather than collecting metadata specifically during the project as well. So it's both documentation and then also standards that could be used to describe the data so that it can be found later. In storage and backup, there's some questions about the general storage requirements. Where will the data be stored? How will it move around? If it's moving around during different phases of the project, or if there are people working on it from different locations, how is that going to work? What's the governance in place? What's the, technical capability? Are you collecting it in REDCap and then moving it to SharePoint and then moving it somewhere else to compute on it? Or how is that going to work exactly? And what are all the infrastructures involved in storing the data? And then if relevant, which usually it would be relevant in these kind of cases, what cybersecurity and privacy measures are in place to protect the data? So explaining that, in terms of, are there going to be statistical work to anonymize the data or de-identify it or things of that nature? In data sharing and reuse, we again talk about the FAIR principles and explain them a little bit more deeply in terms of what it means, how you describe in your data management plan, how the data will then become fair at the end of the project. So will you be using open or preservation formats, things like CSV or tab delimited spreadsheets instead of Excel files. So really just basic things of that nature are worth describing so that it shows that it's going to be packaged in a way that it could be fair at the end of the project, if that's applicable in the case of your project. And then thinking about retention. After the project is complete, where will the data be stored? How long will it be retained? Is it the raw data? Is it the anonymized data, et cetera? Things like that. And then how will you share the data at the end of your project? So there's some recommendations and guidance around licensing data on the right-hand column and things like terms of use for data and conditions for reuse of data. So data doesn't have to be completely open to be fair. It could be controlled access and restricted. There would be some work that would need to be done to make it fair if it is restricted. So if people can't access it directly, they have to know how they could access it. There have to be machine readable licenses attached to it, things of that nature. So I could also help with anyone who is wondering about how to describe this in their data management plan. If you need some guidance, you can also contact me about how that would be, what would be the way to plan for that at the end of the project. And then if it's relevant, how will the data be destroyed at the end of the retention or preservation period? And finally, we have some questions about governance related to the project. So who's the main steward for the data? Who has access to the data? How is that access brokered and maintained and audited according to making sure that people have the correct access and, making sure that people who have left the project are offboarded so that they lose their access and don't have access to any copies of data. And we've created a sort of example here of a table where you could just sort of list people with their affiliation, their role, and their access level. So if you wanted to respond to questions with tables or bullet points, that's fine, actually. It's more important to just have that information in a really clear way than to think about it has to be written in the same way that you would write a grant proposal where it's like more of a narrative. It's fine to just list things as long as it's clear. So that's also an option. If you wanted to respond just using a table, you can click this little table icon and you can add a table and then label it however you want for any of the questions. So that's also an option. That's fine. And then how will responsibilities be transferred in the case that there's new team members, new trainees, or in the case that the PIs change or something like of that nature. So just thinking that through from the beginning and having a plan for that. And I think most folks do have that plan in place. So it's just a matter of like articulating what the process is and what's the workflow. So once you've finished filling out the template and answering all the questions, that's your data management plan. I would skip this research outputs tab. It's kind of like become built into the template tool. And honestly, it's not really relevant to a lot of what people are working on when they're writing data management plans. The other two things that are relevant would be sharing the plan. So you can invite collaborators. When you're finished, you want to add Mathieu so that he can have all of them in his dashboard. And if you go to this request feedback tab, it would actually go to me. I don't mind giving feedback, but in the case where someone's using a D2R template, I will also loop in Mathieu at the same time. So we would both look at it, or at least he would know that feedback had been requested. So that would be the workflow for requesting feedback. That's fine. But basically what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll leave comments. So don't be scared if you see that I'm in there leaving comments in your DMP. That's the sort of workflow if someone requests feedback. And then we also recommend, so it's nice to have the DMP in the system if Mathieu has access, then there's, a collection of these for D2R that lives in the system, and that's great. But you might want to keep a copy of it in your lab directory so that your staff or your collaborators have access to it as well on a day-to-day basis. So it could be something that lives with SOPs or with documentation around the project. So you could export it as a Word document and work with it within that context as well, or keep a copy that lives with the lab itself, with the project itself. So we recommend both of those options. And now I am going to switch back to our presentation, and Mathieu has a few closing remarks, and then we would be happy to take questions if there are any. Okay.
Okay, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so to conclude this presentation, I have a couple of slides. First one is to reiterate why research management and data management plan are important for research project. A lot of people see this work of generating data management plan as just a paperwork, but we think it's not just a paperwork. It's really a way for you to think in advance about your project, about how you will structure your data and how you will organize your research project. And it's really helped people to save time and reduce correction when you publish your data and to get cited, the fact that your data is accessible. So really, it's important, and it's why we ask and we require funded project to do it. So because really we think it will help you to publish. It will improve the quality of the research because you will have a clear idea of what needs to be done, and being more visible and more impactful will help you to get more collaboration afterwards and help your data to be more valuable. And at the end, the fact that we really ask for security measure will also help you to lower the risk of being scooped or being having your data being lost because you don't have explicit role of who is doing what, who is storing what. So really, we think it's really important and really helpful for research quality. And could you go to the next slide, please? The second point I want you to go in my concluding remark is how to make it real in your lab, because building a data management plan is one step, but the most important after that is how to make it happen in the lab. So it's important to own the data management plan, which means that you need to have at least one person in the lab that is the data steward that will manage the application of the data management, but also will keep it current. Will ensure that the data management is up to date if there's any change in terms of what data to be generated or how to be stored, because maybe you have buy new equipment, maybe the research project have changed of direction. So it's important that someone is really like in charge of keep it real. And yeah, we suggest that you update your plan at a specific milestone. As I say, if you have a new instrument, if you have a new cohort, if you do a major change, or if you do, write an article, it's good to have a check of if it is my data management plan still aligned with what I've done and what I will done in the next month and in the next year. So it's important that you did it at the beginning, because what we recommend is once you have picked the format, the metadata standard, the repo, the sharing option, then it's easier to decide that at the beginning and then to follow what have been decided instead of try to change or try to think every time you reach another step in your research project. Another important point to make it real is link it with your data. If you submit your data and you have accession ID, put it in the new version of your data management plan. If you record your code in a pipeline like GitHub, or if you use electronic lab notebooks, then link it to your data management plan so you can easily find which electronic notebook is used for this project. If you publish a paper, use the DOI and include it in your data management plan. It helps people to really get back to your data. And for sure, writing data management plan is a task, and writing the first version will take you maybe a couple of days of work or a couple of hours, depending on how you are familiar with a different concept and how you are already organized in your lab. But once you have generated your plan, it's important that just doing an update, they will take you 10 minutes a week or 10 minutes a month, depending on how things change in your labs, or 10 minutes a semester, to really ensure that you have logged the last change and the last evolution of your work. And then you will always be kind of safe on how my data and how my research output is organized. Next slide, please. I think it's the end. So to finish, yeah. To finish, we provide you a couple of a link here, so you could have. So we will share the presentation with the participant after the workshop. So it's link about the guideline and best practices, that is for D2R, but also link about the McGill from McGill Library to how to write data management plan, and link to the DRS teams that can help you as we can for writing your plans. Thank you, everyone. If you have question, I don't know if you can raise your hand directly or if you want to prefer write in the chat, but we're here for another couple of minutes to answer your question. Thank you very much. No question? Okay. Okay. Do you want to add anything else, Aliza?
If anyone thinks of a question later or wants to talk about their own project and how to, frame their work with their data or their management of their data, you can contact either one of us. I'm happy to look at data management plans or give advice on it in general as well. So feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, I will second Alisa words. We're here to help you writing your data management plan. So we know it could be scary at first, but that's not that complicated. And both Alisa and me and my team are there to help you and guide you in this process. So really feel free to reach out to us if you have any question, comment, or suggestion.
And I will say, I think it's easier to think about the time that's put into a data management plan and to feel a bit like overwhelmed by it, because you have to but you don't have to sit down and do it all at once. You can answer one question. If you have 5 minutes, start writing out some notes. You can do it in bullet points. And I will say the time you spend on a DMP will not compare to the time wasted trying to track down things when it's not explained somewhere, or re-explaining it to people on your team over and over when you're onboarding new trainees or you have new staff or something like that. It saves a ton of time. You can just point people directly to the DMP. I would also say that, you could think of it like a protocol. So in many cases, when we're doing clinical work or research in clinical with clinical data, there's an expectation of folks to publish their protocols in advance, right? So their hypotheses and their methods that they're going to use to keep them transparent. And this is somewhat of a similar thing. It's not published, but it's a way of showing that you have a plan for how things are going to work with the data, that it was done up front, and that, you're fully transparent about it. So I think it's good for you, but it's also a good way to show some transparency with the research process in general related to the data.
Good. So thank you everyone for attending the workshop, and feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to